Okay, then let's start the session. So the title of the session today is a bit wordy. It's two parts indeed. The first part is the best practice when working with the tables and columns in Dataverse. And the second part is the tools to prevent if you have created something not aligned with your desire, not as per the standard. So before we jump into the session, I'll introduce myself a little bit for those who doesn't know me. My name is Linn, and I'm Microsoft Business Application MVP. I'm currently working as a technical architect and based in Wellington, New Zealand. So I started my career Dynamics 365, Microsoft CRM, and then Dynamics 365. So that's my main focus. But lately, I've been working a lot in the cloud flows to automate in the Dataverse, and sometimes building Canvas apps in the Power Apps. So when I am not working, I just share my knowledge with the community by blogging. You can follow me at linzowin at .blogspot.com, or you can follow me on the Twitter, and also do forum participations and speaking in the conferences like this or user groups. Oh, and before this in this slides, when I mentioned about the tools, there are I have specified the URL of the tools to download or more information about the tools. So if you are interested to keen to download this presentation slide, you can go to this URL and you can just download it. And you can also scan the QR code and download it. I will also drop a link at the end of the session. So when I'm not doing any work and community contributions, my hobbies are playing games and watching anime. So the agenda for today's session is, as I mentioned, the best practices for tables and columns, but not breaking apart into the two two part of the sessions. So for each best practice, I will also include the tools which will enhance or fix to comply with these best practices. And at the end of the session, what I want to do is, other than the Q&A, I also would like you to share your idea about this, the best practice or whatever you're doing in your team. Because disclaimer for the whole session today is the best practice based on my personal experience and the previous projects. It may or may not apply to each and every project because there's a different nature of the project. So I also would love to learn from you all by having this last bit of the session. I'm not sure how it's possible considering that we are having this online session and I noticed there are not a lot of interaction happening, but we'll see. So this is the very important part that I noticed. Whenever we create a table, I always create a table as the user or team's ownership, because sometimes like even the reference data like country or ethnicity, it doesn't need to have a security privilege based on the ownership role. But even those kind of reference data, there's a change in the decision by the business owner later in the project. So for example, if we have this case category, and case category is the reference data, so you can show it to the whole organization. But what happened is later in the phase 2 or phase 3, they roll out this system to the different business units, and guess what? They in the new business unit, they don't want to see the case categories from the original business unit, and vice versa. So when they select in the lookup, they don't want to see the other uh, business units categories. So once you have created as the organization, you cannot change to the user or team's own. So in that case, it's also like really hard to recreate in the later part of the project once the project is go live. So for me, it's no harm to create as a user or team ownership. The only thing is you will have the owner field. You can hide it if you don't want it. And when you configure a security role, there will be additional clicks to have a entity ownership. So for me, I always recommend using the user and team table ownership, even if it is the tables that you are sure that's sharing across the whole organization. And another thing is to always set the table image, the icons. If you don't, it's quite a bit ugly to see this kind of thing in the model-driven app sitemap. And even the table is not in the sitemap. If you're using in the lookups, you can see just like this in the sitemap. So you don't have to do it. If you don't want to do it, you can leave it for very transactional, low-level tables, but at least do it for the tables which are being shown in the sitemap and the lookups. That's my suggestion. So in order to do that, one of the tools is an XRM toolbox, Iconator. It is really simple. You can just select the table and you can select the icon image. In the model-driven app, you only have to do it for SVG format. And then once you're done, you can just click on map. And if you are map multiple tables at the same time, and then after that, you can apply and publish the changes over here. So it is really simple too. So even if you don't have the table images, you can even add images in this tool. But the only downside with adding the images from using the tool is you cannot create as a folder structure. So let's say if you are using the folder structure to apply for web results, then you better use a different tool to upload this image first and do the mapping over here. And I also would like to share the few areas, tools, and the website that you can get the icons for free. So the first one is the Power BI tool by Matthew. Matthew has this Power BI tool, and you can just search for the icon that you want. And once you get it, you can copy this SVG code, paste it into the notepad, and save it as a .svg file. So the second one is by Ben Warner. This is the Power Apps icon menu builder app. So this app will contain 29,000 icons. So the Fluent UI icons, material design, simple icons, the game icons. So you can have and search a lot of icons and download it for here. Other than these two, there are some websites, the free icon sites, iconfinder.com or flyicon.io. And this one, the noun project, is a Creative Commons license. So for the free version, you have to give attribution to the creator. And for a flat icon, there are a lot of choices, but the only thing is that if you want to download for a premium SVG version, you have to subscribe for the premium membership. And when you configure the tables and when you configure the relationship between these tables and lookups, what I recommend is to review the relationship behavior. There is no best practice or just one size fit all, but the idea here is to just review it and don't cascade unnecessarily. That may cause some issues. For example, if you have the case and you're cascading all the activities for assignment, and the problem is if you do the assignment ownership, all the activities are also assigned, and if the activity read access is at the global access level, organization level anyway, so it doesn't need the assignment. But what happens if you assign the ownership change and the modifier by of these activities are changed? And if you don't configure your timeline properly and the activities in the timeline sorting is like show differently based on the modify on, which is the undesired outcome of this configuration. At the same time, like some of the things like sharing, if you're having a cascade, it's also share the child records when you share the parent records. But if you don't have to do it, then just keep it to cascade none. Otherwise, it will share unnecessarily, and sometimes you have a problem like your user is seeing the records, but you cannot troubleshoot how the user is seeing the records. But it's really hard to troubleshoot this kind of cascading the sharing. And there's the tool to review those. And one of the tools is the activity cascade rules. It doesn't do the checking for all the table tasks, but at least it does for activities and the relationship between the activities and its parent tables. But this is only for assignment, so you can check once it is assigned. You can set the rule and bulk updates in this tool. Oh, okay. So I also got a comment in the session as another icon too is Metro Studio 5. Yes, I've also used that previously before. It is a Windows application that you install and you just build and choose the color of the icons and save it as a SVG. Another advice that I would suggest is when you configure a table, make sure you only enable the audits when it is necessary. Don't enable the audit for all the tables that you create, because the log capacity come as a 2 GB by default. And what happens is when you have a new license, with a Dynamics license or perhaps user license, normally it will add up the storage capacity for the file storage and the database storage, but there's no additional bonus for audit storage because of the additional license. So once you hit that 2 GB default value, so you have to buy it. So you have to define your audit retention policy. Like otherwise, you have to pay for it. It is in New Zealand, I think it is $15.1 New Zealand dollar for 1 GB per month. And it is important to review the audits before it explodes. So what you can do is you can use this audit center tool to review the audits. And this tool you can review and see which are the available entities tables enable for audit. And when you click on this table, you can review what are the columns enabled for the selected table. and you can add or remove in bulk using the tool in one place without going and navigating around in the Solution Explorer. So that is a really neat tool to manage the audit data. So after the tables configuration, I'll just move on to the columns, some best practice for the columns configuration. So the first one is the choice. Please always create the choice column as a global choice. A lot of times when we create a choice as a local one, constantly thinking that, okay, we'll only use it for one particular table. We're not going to use anywhere. But again, business requirement change, and we'll have to use the same place in another place. So it's nothing different. I don't think it takes a lot of storage database or anything by using as a global storage choice. The only thing is if you have a lot of choice column, there will be a lot of global choices in the solution component as a solution. I'm really glad that Microsoft in the new Maker portal, it is quite well hidden to create a local choice. So before that, it's really easy to create a local choice, but here they can only the maker can only click on the view more and to create a choose and global choice and local choice. So what happened is if we create a local choice, we cannot use in some of the areas, like let's say if you have a address type. So you have the address type for address 1, address type for address 2, and you cannot copy the data across using the workflow, the classic workflow, because it is not sharing the same set of choice. But other than that, it is possible to use in other areas like the cloud flows or JavaScript. But I recommend to choose the global choice for all of the choice columns. And this one is a bit not sort of like a best practice, but just for you to consider and ask the users before you create the yes no column. So what happened is if you create a yes no column as a yes no field, and suddenly the users say, okay, actually we want the default as empty. So we don't want no to be default. So then we will have to recreate as the choice column. So that is really important to consider and create as either you want to create as a choice column or a yes no column. And some people, they even go as far as always create as a choice column, and if there's always yes no, they will just set it as a no as a default so that there will be no empty field. But the only downside is you cannot use the toggle control if you're or a checkbox if you are creating as a choice column. So if you just happen to create a yes no column, and if you just want to later create as a option sets, or if you just want to have a local choice column, and if you just want to create as a global choice, you can always use this attribute manager tool. So this tool will allow you to delete the old column and recreate it as a new column. And at the same time, if you do the migrate data, it will just copy and paste it into the new column by doing the mappings. So it's really neat because when you want to delete or replace the existing column, it's quite a headache because it is referenced in a lot of forms, a lot of views, and a lot of solution components. You have to go and remove them one after another and publish everything, and then recreate a new one, and then re-edit and publish everything. So it is quite a headache. But by using a tool, the tool will handle everything by creating a temp column, migrate the data, and remove all of the references in the solution components and create in the same place. So you don't have to worry about anything. So that's where I always use this tool to recreate the columns when the column we identify the issue still in the dev environment. But if you're just having not the whole data type, if you just want to change the format of your column, for example, you created a single line of text, but you just want a multi-line input, and so you cannot change it to a multiple line of text, but what you can do is you can change it to the text area. So this is the new tool called Dataverse Format Changer that is using the new API allowed by Microsoft to change the format of the column within this is available options. Let's say you just created a text column, but it is supposed to be shown as the URL, and you can just change it to the URL or email text. So another one I recommend is to deprecate the table or columns. So if there's any table or columns that you're not going to use anymore, please deprecate it by putting a prefix. I use $Z, and if you do that, one advantage if it shows at the end of the advanced file, so it's not showing up in the list of the tables in the advanced file. And also, if you are using it for a system configuration as a maker, you can easily identify those deprecated columns in the security role, the classic workflow, and the cloud flow, the bar apps. So if you see those references, you will see that, oh, this table is this column is already deprecated. It's still referenced in this cloud flow, and you can easily identify and update it. So it's one of the best practice to deprecate by updating the display name. And there is a tool for it, and there's a deprecation tool in XAMPP toolbox. And what it does is you just select the particular table and you just checkbox the columns that you want to deprecate and just click apply. So that will update the display name with ZZ underscore prefix for all of the columns that are checked. So sometimes you want to know which fields columns to deprecate by finding the usage, how it is being used in the system, how the users are populating. And a lot of the times when in the beginning project, the users will be like, oh, I want this field, I want this to populate, I want this column to keep track of this remarks, and later down the 2 years of this project, we can revisit and analyze which fields are actually filled and which fields are actually not used at all. So you can use this to entity fields analyzer to check how many of the columns records have this particular value for this particular column. And it also shows the different other analyzations like how many types of data field column types in the selected table, and a lot of how many unmanaged versus unmanaged, and other how many available fields to be created. So that if there's a limitation and you want to create like thousands of columns for this particular table, you can always see how many columns you can still create it by using this tool. And this is to analyze the usage of the columns. And for usage of the table, you can use this entity usage overview. So what this tool does is you can load the list of the tables, like all tables or custom tables, only system tables. And then you can view the number of custom attributes in custom columns in this table. And for selected ones, we can check the row counts, how many rows created for this one. And we can analyze those data and use it to deprecate the tables which are no longer in use. And another advice, like that's a really bit annoyed me in one of the projects, like if you change the table name, make sure you change the plural name as well. And if you have an inconsistent plural name from the table name, what happens is when you go to the advanced find, oh, okay, where is the experiment? I can find the experiment, and I ended up the plural name is still the old name, and you cannot find it in the. Let's say if you are using the list roles in the action in the cloud flow, it will just show you the plural name of the table, and you cannot find it if it is the inconsistent plural name and the singular name. That is the same thing. If you want to change the label of the column on the form, so make sure you change the display name of the column as well, because this column names in the our display name are shown in the views, as well as you go to the advanced find to filter or add the columns, you will have to find it with this display name. So if I am quite getting used to this name by using it on the form, and if I cannot find the advanced find, that will be a problem. And as well as for makers, like you use the classic workflow or Cloudflow or Power Apps formula, you have to use this display name, so it needs to be consistent across display name and the label on the form. Well, there may be some exception, like you have a very extra long 150 character label on the form, or if you have some label which is shown dynamically based on the other value or the form type. Yeah, in those scenarios, it makes sense to have a different value. But other than that, if there's no particular reason, I totally suggest to keep these column names consistent. Oh, another one is the unique display name. If you have the address line 1 for postal code and address line 1 for physical address, and if you put on them as address line 1, and let's say if you change the status reason to status, and there are 2 status column, and it's a problem when you're using the advanced find. We have to figure out which one is which. And not only that, if you have 2 columns with the same display name in the view, when you export to Excel, there are some errors throwing. And other than that, it's also hard when you are using the classic workflow, the cloud flows, and perhaps formulas to identify when there are two columns with the same name. So just keep some prefix or postfix or something with a bracket to make two columns different instead of having the duplicate name. And not only two columns, also avoid the same name for the table and column. So for example, this is the table name is group. And what happened is the primary column of the table, the primary as in the TUID column of the table is created as the same name as the table name group. And when you try to create the column with the same name, these two column become the same name. And it's not noticeable in most of the areas, but when you build a Canvas app formula, it's confused with this column and the custom column that you create. So also avoid the same name for a table and the column. And this is the tool which to enforce, not enforce, more like the review for your attribute naming. For example, if you have if your team has come up with a naming convention for a particular column type, if you have, let's say, if you have a lookup column, you want to end the column with ID, and if you have the choice column, you want to end the column name with a code. And if you don't want the users to create the column with a new underscore, what this tool can do is it can just pick a solution and it review all the columns in that solution, and it shows the data of how many of the columns are complying with this data and how many of the columns are not comply. You can see the details and which columns are violating the rules that you have set it up. So that's really neat too if you have a naming convention. And this is just not related to the creating the column name columns, but this is just to the populate the name of the column. Sorry, the name of the row. So if you create a data, especially when you create the data for a transactional data, we don't have any data to fill into the name column. So what happens if we don't create a name, it was shown as a new table name instead of showing with the name of the row. So you can use the classic workflow or the Cloudflow to do this auto-populate the name and concatenate from the other columns. For me personally, I quickly use the classic workflow, even though it is not preferably Microsoft has recommend to use the Cloudflow, but for me it's just like 1 minute job to create a quick workflow which will update the name by, especially when you have to populate the name from the lookup. If you're using the Cloudflow, you will have to get a row step, and that will take like 5-10 minutes. And instead of that, you can quickly use the classic workflow to populate the name. And it is easy and yeah, really fast to do it. Another tool for which is really helpful with the makers is to attribute build updater. That is where you want to change the way to show or hide this particular columns from the advanced file, or if you want to change it for the audit status or if you want to change whether the column is secure or not, you can use this attribute bulk updated and do in the multiple columns at once. Another tool that really helped me a lot when creating a lot of columns is Attributes Factory. So we have, let's say this is the import Excel file that you can just import it, and you specify the display name, schema name, and which entity, which table you are going to add, and what is the column types, and what you can specify. And once you that after that, you can import it using the tool, and this tool can show whether you want to create or delete, update the existing one, and if that's not included in the spreadsheet, whether you are not going to delete or not. I personally have used it multiple times, especially when I have to create tables with like hundreds of columns for some reason. And especially it's also useful when you have a defined requirement to build a table and do the documentation before you even start creating the column. So if you already have the data in the document, might as well just dump it into this Excel template and let the tool create instead of going through one by one. So another tool that I just recommend is the description and text. This tool, what it does is it export the description of all the columns in your whole Dataverse environment, all the tables. And then what you can do is you can bulk update in the description in your Excel and then re-import it back. In that way, you don't have to go through multiple tables and multiple columns to update the description. And this is the easy translator, which is when you're working on the project where you have a multi-language to show with the multiple different languages, you can use this tool to export out the tables, and in the Excel file, you just populate the secondary language of your choice and then re-import it back. In that way, you don't. It's really easy than normally updating the translation data mapping. And the last but not least, this tool is the metadata document generator. When you have a request to do the documentation of your system at the end of the project, you are asked to do for an SBIL document, and you can use this tool to select the tables and export it out to Excel, and it will generate each table into the different spreadsheets, or you can specify to export all the column in one single sheet. So this is also one of my favorite tools to document this metadata. Okay, that is the end of my presentation, and I would like to welcome to unmute yourself and ask any question, or even just discuss and share your experience and share your opinion about your best practice that is applying in your organization or in your team. Marianne?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so you mentioned around renaming the table. Do you also export the translations?
So renaming
Renaming tables, right? So, because when you rename a table, like there are like the view names would still be referencing to the old table name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never used the tool for renaming. So you said you can use this tool to rename for
No, this one is Translator. So I haven't come across a tool in XRM Toolbox, but what I did is export the translations, and then you find and replace those the previous table name with the new name, and then import it back. So that's the shortcut to renaming all those views and even the any descriptions. I think that's reference to the old table name.
Yeah, I remember what I did previously is I just export into the solution and updated the solution customization XML in the notepad and update those table names. But I believe if we can use this tool to update the values in the primary, even the English one, I think we can use this tool to
yeah,
update.
it's actually export translations. Yeah. This might work.
Yeah. Abby?
Oh, hi. I want to ask you a bit more related to the Dataverse format changer.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't used that before. Can you explain a bit more on that? What is it equivalent to in the UI, or is there anything equivalent to this from the customization side?
Okay. What I will do is I will share my screen and I will show in the environment what's equivalent into the Maker portal. So in the Maker portal, when we let's wait for a while.
Does this only work against test field, or it also works against other types of fields?
Okay, so it is currently working for whole number.
Whole number.
Microsoft has a documentation around that, what it is available and what are the columns that you can change. So I will paste it in this chat. Okay, so this is the Microsoft Docs about what are supported, what are the formats that you can change. Basically, what you can do is change the text, multi-line, whole number, and date and time. So what happened is if there is the text, if we create as for example, email, anything in this group.
Oh yeah, I see.
Text to phone. So we can change from text to auto number, vice versa. But if we can, once we create as a, let's say, URL, we cannot change it to email or text area. So this tool will allow you to change that format without recreating the column. So the difference between this, the attribute manager and data form, the attribute manager and this format changer is that attribute manager recreates the whole, delete and recreates with the same name.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So there's a chances like it takes a lot of time. Like if you have especially thousands of rows, it will take a lot of time to migrate the data and recreate. where the Dataverse format changer is just changing the format in the back end, so it doesn't recreate or delete or anything.
So I would imagine the format available here is also constrained to the format it can be changed to.
Yes.
Okay, I see.
So let's say for the text, you can interchange. You can change from text to the others, or text area to the others. So the format that you can change is limited to each data type. So you cannot change the text to whole number.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
That
that's
answers my question. Thank
yeah,
you so much.
yeah, no worries. Okay, so is there anyone else? Any question? And here is the URL to download the slides. So if you can have more information about the links that I share in the presentation, you can have it